Those buildings, in some cases, full of people working. Many, many lives will be lost before this is over. And so we do tell you, as we have talked about before, Susan mentioned her son a moment ago, there are a lot of parents, again, a frightening shot. This has just been released mere moments ago. CBS News releasing this video of the plane again crashing into the second plane, crashing into the second tower. There will be discussions in living rooms, perhaps going on right now, trying to explain to children, what does all this mean? Trying to explain to ourselves the loss of life that we are watching. There are lives being lost at this very moment. It should not be lost in the horrendous pictures that we're seeing, that these are very disturbing scenes, and we'll continue to remind you of that as well in these pictures as the building collapses onto the streets of New York, and a doctor valiantly works his way back into the chaos to try to save others. But again, you should note that some of these pictures you may not want your young people to see. They may not understand the scope, the severity, the tragedy that they are witnessing here. So we leave that to you to explain to your children. But again, we try to bring you the pictures as they happened on the streets of New York.
And we also apologize if there is picked up any strong language, as you can imagine, at a time like this. We have put some of the video on the air without being able to censor it ahead of time. I'm sure you understand as our viewers. And we apologize ahead of time. We are doing our best to not enter your living rooms with anything that you would not want your families to see or hear. But again, under the circumstances, it's pretty hard to do. And we want to do the best we can, bringing you the full story from all our sources, CBS, CNN, Associated Press, Wires, and all the others that we have access to.
And of course, all of our news crews out in the field at the military installations here, which will undoubtedly play a role in the days and weeks to come as we learn more about the source of this attack. Certainly our elected leaders, they have moved on the offensive early today, from the governor right on through the county executive and the mayor. All have issued statements about what they expect in this city. How can we help? We already have emergency personnel here who are trained to search in just these kinds of situations. Explosions, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, they will be scrambled as well, and we'll be covering those stories for you. But for the moment, as we are this 8 or 9 hours following the initial blast, still trying to come to grips with the scope, the magnitude of the tragedy, and the attack on America.
So many comparisons today to Pearl Harbor, because that's the last time anyone can remember America being under attack. Of course, the comparisons stop when you realize that that attack was military on military, and this was terrorism on civilians. We also question the date, and if the date had any significance. We have received some information that back in 1978, the first historic Camp David Accords were signed on September 11th, although other information says that that whole meeting ended on September 17th, so it's not clear. I have also heard a reference to this date being September 11th or 9/11, and we don't know if the terrorists had any intention or if this was just coincidence of choosing that particular number. But certainly we will never forget 9/11/01 as long as we live.
They told me just to wait here.
Meantime, you'll continue to look at these pictures. We will show them to you. We continue to marshal our forces here and bring you the stories both locally, nationally, and internationally. Right now, we're going to go back to CBS News in New York as they continue to cover live the story of America under attack.
There's small explosions still going on.
Time, Eastern time. One plane has hit the upper tier, but watch the left-hand corner of your screen. The second World Trade Tower has not yet been hit. It's about 9 a.m. Here comes the plane, very high speed, cuts almost through the building. Great balls of fire, tremendous bellows of smoke. The voices you hear in the background, the people in the home or the place where these pictures were taken. So the second building was hit. Now, you note the plane went in at about, that aircraft hit that tower at floor about 71. The first building was hit, 90 or above, say. So both buildings are now smoke and flame. Now, different view. Both buildings are aflame. And then the building that was hit second comes tumbling down. That was the one where the airplane came in particularly quickly and hit the building at about floor 71. The Chrysler building in the background. Now, the second tower, which was actually hit first by American Flight 11, begins to crumble. And disappear. And since then, the most recent collapse, which happened just a short while ago, Building 7, a 47-story building as part of the World Trade Center complex, collapsed. That building had been, we were told, completely evacuated. But the fate of people on the ground, including rescue workers, as it came tumbling down, we simply don't know. But it had been threatening to collapse, had been on the verge of collapse for a long while, so perhaps most of the area had been evacuated. But who could have anticipated this kind of incredibly dense and fast-moving smoke, which covers many blocks in New York? And like some white monster, came quickly down side streets and major thoroughfares. Now stay with me here, stay with us here. CBS, this is another, see the plane? This is another view, more videotape. This plane.
Against a backdrop of gentle blue sky, a terrorist arrow pierces the heart of a city and a nation.
Oh. Those two sequences we should see again.
One more horrifying than the next.
And we will show you.
This was a United Airlines flight 175.
Some of this video has just now become available. And in the aftermath, well, if you've been with us, you know what happens. We're going to try to re-rack. That's the opposite side of the second tower hit. You know, we had different views during the day, but this was photographed from that side of the building. Now, we're going to re-cue that sequence of videotape. This includes new videotape material obtained by CBS News over the last hour and a half. We have shown some of it. Now, this is the latest new video we have. You see the plane coming in high speed, aiming for the mid-level, and hits it. That was the second flight, United Flight 175, and this is a reverse side of the building. See, the plane actually pierced the building and virtually came out the other side. Yet another view, the plane hitting.
It's almost like the building swallowed the plane.
Yeah.
Yes. And here you see this aircraft below. Did you see that? You had to be looking closely on the right-hand side to see it hitting there. And indeed, Russ Mitchell said it's almost as if the building swallowed the plane and then belched back up. Well, nobody's ever seen photographs like that because nothing like this has ever happened before. We go to David Martin at the Pentagon.
Dan, we were talking earlier about
middle of the night in Afghanistan now, just guessing here at about 2 o'clock in the morning. There have been explosions reported in Kabul, Afghanistan, with these pictures coming from our friends at CNN. Still, details on that very unclear. These pictures, a mixture of live and tape, but you see the, well, that appears to be attempts at anti-aircraft fire, at shots being fired into the air, but we are being told from CNN and other sources that there are explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan tonight. Whether this and how it relates to what we've been witnessing throughout this day, we can't tell you with any certainty yet. We're on top of that story.
Moment, the city still trace of fire, rockets going up around the airport, trace of fire flying across the city in the direction of the airport. The city at this stage still very well illuminated. The electricity supply is still on in the city, illuminating the city. Detonation coming in from towards the airport. Multiple detonations now going off again towards the perimeter of the city in the direction of the airport. We see one fire on the horizon at this moment. Kabul is surrounded by mountains. The detonations reverberate from those mountains, so it's difficult to get an accurate fix on exact.
The World Trade Center is no more.
And this is a live picture at the column of smoke and ash still billowing up from the lower Manhattan area of New York over the skyline, which will now be forever changed as terrorists today crashed 2 hijacked jetliners into the World Trade Center and brought down the twin 110-story towers. Another hijacked commercial jetliner crashed into the Pentagon in Washington. Good evening to you. I'm Brian Williams. It is 6 p.m. on the East Coast, 3 p.m. on the West Coast on what has been one of the most horrifying days in American history. Terrorists carrying out well-planned, well-coordinated attacks that have left perhaps thousands dead, thousands more injured. President Bush is vowing to hunt down those responsible. He is due to address the nation tonight at a time yet to be announced.
Dennis Bounds and Gene Anderson. For those of you listening on King Television and those joining us from Kong Television, what you're looking at is a live video phone picture from CNN of an apparent attack on Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. We don't know the source of this attack or the nature of it, but we do know that this is the place where the Taliban is located, and it had been speculated, though not confirmed, Osama bin Laden, an Afghan leader, likely was behind the terrorist attack in New York and Washington, D.C. today. So perhaps this is retaliation, this is a strike back at Afghanistan.
But no one can say for sure. The Taliban fundamentalist government that leads that country was mentioned. The Taliban was mentioned by Representative Jennifer Dunn when we had our conversation with her as to who might be responsible. That was just one of the possibilities that she put forth. What we are seeing now is obviously an air attack. Let's listen into the CNN reporter.
Rockets perhaps going at the speed of several hundred miles an hour, the sort of speed that one might expect to see cruise missiles traveling across the horizon at, burning with a white glow coming from their tails rather than a yellow glow. The fire on the horizon that we can see from here burning furiously now. Perhaps it would be accurate at this stage to suspect that that was a fuel dump that's been hit by the way that it's burning, flames leaping, and that fuel dump must be perhaps 5 to 8 miles from where I am. Flames leaping up from that fuel dump now leaping up right into the air. It was a low-burning fire before, but it's now really increased in its ferocity, perhaps indicating that it is a fuel dump. Looking across the rest of the city, that fuel dump, perhaps the only big fire we can see at this time. From our vantage point here at the Kabul Intercontinental Hotel that overlooks the whole of the city of Kabul, that is in a basin surrounded by mountains, the whole city is laid out in front of us. The gunfire that was coming up from the city seems to have subsided for now. We're not hearing any more detonations at this moment. And as I say, the fire on the horizon really burning furiously at this time, flames leaping way up in the air this moment. Joey?
Nick, if you can talk to us a little bit about your circumstance. It is 6 o'clock in the evening here in Atlanta. It must be quite late at night there in Kabul.
Indeed, 2:30 in the morning here, Joey. We're eight and a half hours ahead of East Coast time in the United States. And it was about 5 hours ago that the foreign minister of Afghanistan, Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil, briefed journalists. I hear more detonations going off now. He said that the Taliban had not taken precautions against the possibility of there being an air attack against Afghanistan. He said because it was not necessary. The Taliban spiritual leader, Mullah Omar, had also made a statement saying that they felt Osama bin Laden wasn't responsible for what had happened in the United States. He said his country was a peaceful country. He wanted it to be at peace, and he wanted peace in other countries around the world. Certainly what we're seeing in Kabul these early hours of this Wednesday morning is very far from peace. Certainly multiple explosions happening in and around the city. There is a front line about 50 miles north of the city where the Taliban are fighting a battle against the Northern Alliance here. We could hear detonations coming from that northern area as well. But on the perimeter of the city, particularly in the direction of the Kabul airport, which is about 5 to 8 miles from where we are, detonations coming from there. I remember standing on this balcony about 4 years ago watching fighter jets bomb that airport as part of Afghanistan's ongoing civil war. The flash at the airport to us hearing the detonation at the hotel is about the same duration. So I am using that as an estimate to gauge that those missiles again are falling in the area of the airport. First, we're seeing the flash, and then we hear the detonation some several seconds afterwards, and they appear to be coming from that airport area, in some cases several miles away from us. There is still a lot of flashing we can see in the air reflected off clouds. That could be thunder and lightning. However, there's a possibility that those reflections are missiles landing elsewhere. The flashes as they explode and reflecting off the clouds. But it's not a good indication. We certainly don't hear any detonations coming from that particular direction at this time. The anti-aircraft fire that we were seeing a little while ago is not coming up from the city. The city, apart from the detonations we were hearing a few minutes ago, appears very, very calm. The visibility here is excellent. We can see all the way across the city. It lies on a plain that's surrounded by the mountains here in Kabul. We have high mountains to the right. These mountains were used by the Mujahideen as vantage points for shelling the city several years ago during the Mujahideen infighting in Kabul. The last 5 years, the Taliban have been in control of this city, have been trying to extend their control over and across Afghanistan. And the Foreign Minister this evening telling journalists and CNN that he didn't believe that Afghanistan would be attacked. He said if Afghanistan was attacked, then they would call it, the Taliban would call it an act of state-sponsored terrorism, Joey.
All right, that is CNN's Nick Robertson. Again, please keep the line open to us. Nick Robertson there in Kabul, Afghanistan. For our viewers who are watching this with us on the air, again, we're getting this from video phone technology. You're seeing this exclusively on CNN. It is a very new technology, and so you could tell from the audio line it is not as clear as our typical TV feed, and the visuals obviously are not as clear, but you are looking at the city of Kabul in Afghanistan. This is the seat of the Taliban government there, not its spiritual center, but its government center in any case. You are seeing in just about the last 10 minutes, we have been hearing these reports from CNN correspondent Nick Robertson on the ground in Kabul of an explosion. You see on the right side of your screen about a third of the way over, the flames of fire. They were quite large just a short time ago, seem to have simmered down, but again, we're just not seeing very much of this because it's the video phone. Again, Nick Robertson saying that they had seen tracers going up as well. They have been listening and hearing the possibility of additional explosions elsewhere. They're trying to follow that, but it's a little bit hard to tell. Again, it is 2:30 in the morning in Kabul, and Nick Robertson continues to watch there. Now let's turn to Judy Woodruff for us in Washington. Judy.
Joey, we are in the studio in Washington, but of course riveted to these pictures coming out of Kabul, Afghanistan. With me in the studio watching former United States Defense Secretary William Cohen and Republican Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. I want to ask both of you about what's going on. Let me begin with you, Secretary Cohen. Is this something that is likely to be the United States retaliating, which is what I think immediately comes to people's minds?
I think we have to be very cautious in coming to that judgment, Judy.
what we're looking at now is the United States gathering information and intelligence. Obviously, there are many plans and contingency plans that we have to deal with responding to any potential terrorist threat that might be in the offing again. But I think it's very premature to make any judgment on this. This could be part of the civil war that's been raging on for some time, and so I think we have to wait to get more information.
What do you mean part of a civil war?
Well, there's been a civil war raging in Afghanistan for some time now, and this could be simply the factions still carrying on their fighting in Kabul, rather than any kind of attack being launched by the United States.
Are you saying, Mr. Cohen, that it's unlikely that the United States would move this quickly? I'm asking that because just a few minutes ago I was interviewing former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, and he said flat out what the United States needs to do is strike against countries like Afghanistan that are harboring terrorists and not wait to find out exactly who was responsible for today's atrocities.
Well, I think we do have to isolate and ostracize those countries like Afghanistan and others who are on the terrorist list who give safe harbor for terrorists. But I think we have to be a little more judicious rather than simply striking out. We have to get more information, and further strikes might be warranted. But at this point, I think we get all the information, then make a very cold, ice-cold decision in terms of what we need to do to protect the American people and make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I think that may be a bit premature at this point.
Senator Hatch, again, we're stressing we have no idea who's behind these attacks in Kabul, the government center of Afghanistan. But if this were the West, if this were the United States, would it be appropriate to retaliate so quickly?
Well, we have some information. You know, about a month ago we had information that they were planning on some big strikes, people who were affiliated or associated with bin Laden. Then just today we've intercepted some information where some people who are associated with bin Laden basically said that they had hit 2 targets. So it looks to me like there's increasing evidence, even though it's fragmentary and even though it's not positive, that bin Laden is behind all this. And of course, I first warned the nation in 1996 on Meet the Press that we better get hold of bin Laden or he's going to kill Americans.
We're going to bring back our Nick Robertson there on the ground in, or I should say on top of a building there in Kabul. Nick, you're on. Go.
Well, certainly the fire we were watching on the horizon before, I'd made the assumption that it was an oil depot burning because we've certainly seen flames, a dull yellow fire turn into a bright orange fire with flames leaping into the sky. I've been informed by my associates here who work with us in Kabul that it's very likely an ammunition dump that we're looking at. They believe an ammunition dump is located in that area. That, of course, would account for some of the explosions that we've been hearing here as ammunition has detonated and gone off from that location, Judy. Yeah. Certainly it's all quiet here in Kabul right now. Certainly no more explosions are being heard around the city. And we certainly believe what we're looking at now is an ammunition dump, the fire at that dump now dying down, and we're hearing no more detonations coming from that dump. Certainly Kabul is within striking range of some of the long-range missiles that the Northern Alliance has and is capable of launching in this direction. And certainly in the past, the Northern Alliance has launched missiles at Kabul. It is not without the realms of possibility that the Northern Alliance could launch missiles at this time. The Northern Alliance in the last couple of days has gone through the rather traumatic process of an assassination attempt on its key leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud. Still unconfirmed whether that leader is alive or dead, and certainly there's a ferocity within the internal fighting going on in Afghanistan at this time. One certainly cannot rule out that any missiles falling on the city tonight could be coming from that Northern Alliance.
So, Nick Robertson, just to clarify, you're saying it could well be part of an a civil war that we see here, and not a result of something coming from the West, NATO, the United States?
From our vantage point this evening, we can certainly report a large number of explosions around the city, what appears to be an ammunition dump on fire, a lot of return fire coming up from positions in Kabul. We cannot say from this position at this time exactly where the missiles are coming from, those causing the detonations in and around the city of Kabul. It is possible it's from the Northern Alliance, and of course there is the other possibility that we've been talking about this evening.
And Nick, is this typical of the kind of fire that you've been seeing back and forth in this war that's been going on in Afghanistan? Is this at all typical?
No, one would definitely have to say it's not typical. The strikes on Kabul have been very infrequent over the last few years, very occasional. The Northern Alliance very aware that it's been blamed in the past of many civilian casualties by launching attacks on Kabul. So there have been very few direct attacks on the city. And indeed, the forces of the Northern Alliance are at such a distance back from the city, only long-range, medium-range missiles capable of going 30, 40, 50 miles are able to reach the city from their positions. And it's certainly not something that's happened in this city, a barrage of this type, a sustained artillery attack or missile attack of this type in recent years even.
All right, Nick Robertson, we want you to stay connected to us. Let's keep this connection alive. But as we're watching these pictures, let's now go back to New York and to Aaron Brown. Aaron.
Judy, thank you. I'm joined here as well by Paula Zahn, and you will hear her voice in just a moment. As we continue to look at these pictures out of Afghanistan, again, I would remind you that the technology here is it's called a video phone. It is very high-tech and a little bit imperfect, but it is perfect enough so that you can clearly see that fire burning in the distance. What Nick Robertson has described as an ammunition dump, very probably, and you can very clearly see, or we've been very able to see throughout Nick's reporting, the tracer fire coming up, the anti-aircraft fire coming up.
I think we need to make it clear at this point that no group has claimed responsibility for the multiple attacks today, and yet U.S. intelligence officials confirmed with David Enser earlier today that they believe a group connected to Osama bin Laden may have been involved. You have talked about this all day long, and I think you've done a very good job of explaining how well-financed this would have to have been, how well orchestrated. It begs the question, if not Osama bin Laden, then who?
Then who? Nick, from the very beginning, the Taliban officials, Afghani officials have said, we had nothing to do with this, Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with this. How do you hear that? Was there any nuance in the language that sent a different message that maybe the rest of us might not have heard? Well, perhaps we have lost at least the audio portion here. Jamie McIntyre has been outside the Pentagon. Jamie, can you hear us?
I do hear you.
Are you hearing anything from the Pentagon, wherever the Pentagon might literally be right now, or at least officials, about whether there is an American involvement in what we are looking at in Afghanistan?
I have talked to several senior officials, and they've told me they are not aware of whether or not this is a U.S. military strike, but the most senior officials are in the Pentagon. And in fact, several busloads of reporters are being taken over now to the Pentagon briefing room, where we expect shortly Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, flanked by the Republican and Democratic leaders of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Carl Levin and Senator John Warner, to brief us on developments today. And if this is in fact a military strike or part of a U.S. retaliation, we would expect that Secretary Rumsfeld would tell us at that time. Secretary Rumsfeld has been in the Pentagon all day. He went outside briefly to make an inspection tour of the damage behind me. Many casualties here today, but the Pentagon is refusing to give any numbers or even estimates of how many people were killed and injured in this terrorist attack today here at the Pentagon. But again, no confirmation at this point from any of the officials that I've talked to about whether what we're seeing in Afghanistan is part of a U.S. military retaliation.
Jamie, just to make sure that I've heard this correctly, no one is saying yes it is, but no one has said to you no it's not either, have they?
No, no one has steered us away from it. The officials who have been over here with the press, and we're just about half a mile or so from the Pentagon, simply said that they had not been briefed and were not aware of this action when we told them that CNN was reporting explosions in Kabul. So. But again, several officials speculated that if this were the case, that might explain the reason for Secretary Rumsfeld's appearance. And of course, being flanked by the bipartisan support of Congress is clearly designed to send the message that there may be squabbles between the Pentagon and Congress, but when it comes to something like this, there's absolute unanimity. That may also account for the reason that despite the damage to the Pentagon, that they want to hold this event in the Pentagon briefing room, which is on the other side of the building, which was not damaged by the plane crash into the side of the building, in order to show a portrait to the world that the United States military...
And Gene Anderson and Dennis Pounds back here in the King 5 studios. As you're watching on King 5 and on KONG 616, we will continue to watch the pictures provided by CNN. We do have on the phone with us right now Representative Norm Dix, who's in Washington, D.C. He's a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. Congressman, NBC is